She was used to getting her way in the neighborhood, making sure everything stayed just the way she liked it. Quiet, orderly, and without disturbances. But when a new family moved in, she made a call that would turn her world upside down. This is the story of how a wealthy neighbor's intolerance led to an unexpected showdown with a secret millionaire and changed the neighborhood forever. The Carters, a black family, moved into Evergreen Park on a bright summer day. Andrew Carter, the father, was an unassuming man, polite and reserved, with an easy smile. He had dark skin, neatly trimmed hair, and always wore simple clothes. Most people in the neighborhood would have never guessed that Andrew was a multimillionaire. After selling his tech startup, he had decided to leave the fast-paced city life behind and settle down in a quieter place where his kids could grow up in peace. His wife, Lisa, had a warm presence that drew people to her. She had caramel skin, curly hair she usually kept tied back, and was often seen chatting with people she met while walking their golden retriever, Max. Their children, Sam, Mia, and Toby, were friendly, energetic, and quickly became a familiar sight in the neighborhood, always outside playing on their bikes, shooting hoops, or chasing each other around the front yard. From the start, the Carters were excited to join their new community. They attended block parties, hosted small gatherings, and even joined the neighborhood association. However, it soon became clear that not everyone was happy to see them. Veronica Hathaway, a white, wealthy widow who lived in a grand Victorian house across the street, watched the Carters with a mix of suspicion and irritation. She had lived in Evergreen Park for over 30 years and believed she knew exactly what kind of people belonged in her neighborhood. In her eyes, the Carters did not fit the mold. They were different, and she did not like change. Veronica was a woman who thrived on control. She loved to manage things, whether it was organizing the neighborhood flower show or deciding who should and shouldn't be invited to community events. She was known for her sharp tongue, her conservative views, and her reluctance to accept anything or anyone outside her narrow definition of normal. And so, when she saw the Carter children playing loudly outside, or when she noticed the family having people over, she felt an unwelcome shift in what she had deemed her perfectly curated environment. One day, while Veronica was sipping her afternoon tea and glancing out of her window, she saw a group of neighborhood children, including the Carter kids, running around and playing with a football. Their laughter echoed down the street, a sound that filled most with joy but grated on Veronica's nerves. Her face hardened as she watched them dart between yards, chasing the ball and each other with loud shouts of excitement. That noise, she muttered to herself, it's unbearable and so uncouth. Unable to tolerate it any longer, she picked up her phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Came the dispatcher's voice. Yes, I need to report a disturbance, Veronica began, her voice sounding urgent and authoritative. There are children causing a scene in the street, running around unsupervised, screaming, and playing some kind of rough game. I'm concerned for the safety of our neighborhood. Could you please send an officer? The dispatcher assured her that someone would be sent to investigate, and Veronica hung up, feeling a surge of satisfaction. She was certain that the police would put an end to the nuisance and show the Carters they were not welcome to disrupt the tranquility of her neighborhood. Minutes later, a police cruiser arrived. Officer Daniels, a middle-aged white man with a kind face, stepped out and walked towards the Carters' front yard, where Andrew was playing catch with his youngest son, Toby. Seeing the officer approach, Andrew put on a friendly smile and went to greet him. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" he asked calmly. Officer Daniels, slightly taken aback by Andrew's welcoming demeanor, replied, "We received a call about a noise complaint, sir. Just here to make sure everything is all right." Andrew's smile didn't waver. "Oh, I see. The kids were just playing, and we were having some family fun. We'll make sure they keep it down a bit." The officer nodded, glancing around. He saw children playing, families chatting, and realized there was nothing more than a peaceful neighborhood scene. "Looks like everything is fine here. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Have a good day." Veronica, watching from her window, felt her satisfaction turn to fury. The officer hadn't given a citation, hadn't warned the Carters, hadn't done anything she wanted. She felt her authority being undermined and decided to escalate. Over the next few days, Veronica began a campaign. She wrote a letter to the neighborhood association complaining about new families lowering the standards of Evergreen Park. She knocked on her neighbors' doors, whispering about the inappropriateness of the Carter children playing outside. She even suggested that their presence would lower property values. Some of the neighbors nodded politely, while others distanced themselves from her, uncomfortable with her comments. The Carters, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of Veronica's crusade, continuing to settle into their new life. But one day, when Lisa was outside planting flowers, Veronica decided to confront her directly. She marched across the street, her face set in a tight, determined frown. "Mrs. Carter," Veronica called out in a clipped tone as she approached. "I need to speak with you." Lisa looked up, surprised. "Good morning, Mrs. Hathaway. How can I help you?" Veronica didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I don't know how things were done where you lived before, but in Evergreen Park, we have standards. Letting your children run around like that, making noise, it's just not acceptable. We are a respectable neighborhood, not some playground." Lisa maintained her calm, although her eyes narrowed slightly. "Mrs. Hathaway, my children are just playing outside like any other kids. They're not causing any harm," Veronica scoffed. "If you cannot control them, perhaps you should consider moving somewhere more suitable." At that moment, Andrew appeared beside Lisa. He had been listening from inside the house and decided it was time to intervene. "Mrs. Hathaway," he began calmly, "we're not going anywhere. We moved here because we thought this was a welcoming community and we intend to be part of it." Veronica's face flushed with anger. "A welcoming community does not mean a noisy one. I will not let you disrupt our peace." Andrew, still composed, replied, "We believe in creating a friendly and inclusive neighborhood. We're here to stay, and I hope you'll see the value in getting to know us and our children." Veronica turned on her heel and stormed back to her house, fuming. She decided to take things a step further. The next day, she wrote a formal complaint to the police department, suggesting that the Carters were hosting unsanctioned gatherings and had disruptive guests late at night. She hinted at suspicious behavior, hoping to provoke a stronger response. The following weekend, Officer Daniels and a partner were dispatched again, this time on a call to investigate a potential public disturbance. As they approached the Carter home, they saw kids playing basketball in the driveway, neighbors chatting over a small garden fence, and the faint sound of music from a portable speaker in the backyard. Andrew, seeing the officers again, sighed but greeted them with the same calm demeanor. "Officers, how can I help you today?" Officer Daniels, recognizing him, explained, "We received another call, Mr. Carter, about a potential disturbance." Andrew nodded. "Of course, you're welcome to look around. We're just having a friendly get-together." The officers did a quick check but found nothing out of the ordinary. They nodded, apologizing for the trouble, and assured Andrew that everything seemed fine. Veronica, watching from her window, grew more furious with every interaction. Her complaints were backfiring. Instead of driving the Carters away, she was making herself look foolish, but she refused to relent. Determined to regain control, she tried one last tactic. She spread a rumor that the Carters were having suspicious activities at their home. She told her closest friends, hinting that Andrew might be involved in something illegal. This rumor, however, quickly reached Andrew. Realizing that Veronica wasn't just a disgruntled neighbor, but potentially a real threat to his family's peace, he decided it was time to act. He called a meeting with the neighborhood association and attended with Lisa by his side. At the meeting, Andrew stood up and calmly addressed the group. "I understand there have been concerns raised about our family since we moved in. I'd like to take this moment to introduce myself properly. I am Andrew Carter, and my wife Lisa and I chose Evergreen Park for its reputation as a welcoming community. I'm also a tech entrepreneur and philanthropist. I've invested in several community development projects in cities across the country, improving parks, schools, and supporting local businesses. I've always believed that strong, inclusive communities are built when people come together to support each other, not when they are driven apart." The room fell silent as his words sank in. Many of the neighbors, who had only known Andrew as the quiet, polite newcomer, were shocked. A few exchanged surprised glances, whispering among themselves. Veronica, sitting toward the back, stiffened in her chair, her face pale and tight with disbelief. Andrew continued, "We moved to Evergreen Park because we saw it as a place that embraced diversity, where our children could play outside, make friends, and grow up without fear or prejudice. But it seems there have been some misunderstandings about who we are and why we're here. We're not here to change the character of this neighborhood. We're here to add to it, to become a part of it. Lisa stepped forward, her voice warm and steady. We believe in the power of community, and we'd love for everyone to get to know us, to see us as neighbors and friends, not as strangers or outsiders. We want our children to feel safe and welcomed, just like anyone else's. I hope we can all work together to make that happen. There was a murmur of agreement from several neighbors. Mrs. Ramirez, a longtime resident who had kept to herself, raised her hand. I've lived here for 25 years, and I think it's about time we started to embrace new families. We shouldn't be holding on to old prejudices. The Carters have been nothing but kind and respectful. Others nodded, and some even clapped in agreement. Veronica, sensing the tide turning against her, stood up abruptly. I didn't mean any harm, she stammered, her earlier bravado replaced with uncertainty. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. Andrew looked directly at her, his expression firm but not unkind. Mrs. Hathaway, I understand your concerns, but we all have a right to live here peacefully. We all want what's best for this community. Maybe it's time we start getting to know each other beyond our fears and assumptions. Feeling cornered, Veronica hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Perhaps I've been too quick to judge, she admitted reluctantly. I apologize if I've caused any trouble. Andrew smiled gently. Thank you, Mrs. Hathaway. That means a lot. Over the next few weeks, a surprising shift occurred in Evergreen Park. Andrew and Lisa made an extra effort to reach out to their neighbors, inviting them over for casual dinners, hosting community game nights, and attending every neighborhood event. Slowly but surely, more people began to warm up to them, realizing that they were not only friendly, but genuinely interested in contributing positively to the community. Veronica, despite her initial resistance, found herself curious about the Carters. One afternoon, she received a note from Lisa inviting her to join a small gardening club the Carters had started with a few neighbors. At first, she crumpled the note, ready to toss it aside, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the guilt that had begun to gnaw at her, or perhaps it was the isolation she had started to feel as more neighbors distanced themselves from her. With a sigh, she smoothed out the note and decided to attend. When she arrived at the Carters' house, she was greeted warmly by Lisa. We're so glad you came, Mrs. Hathaway, Lisa said with a genuine smile. We could really use your gardening expertise. I hear your roses are the best in town. Veronica, surprised by Lisa's kindness, felt a small crack form in the wall she had built around herself. She joined the group, and by the end of the afternoon, she was laughing along with the others, sharing tips and stories. Over the next few months, the Carters continued their efforts to build bridges. Andrew used his resources to help organize community events, including a neighborhood cleanup day and a charity fundraiser for the local school. He also began offering free coding workshops for kids and teens, using his background in technology to give back. Veronica, initially reluctant, began to participate more actively. She attended the events, mingled with the neighbors, and even helped Lisa with a community bake sale. Slowly, she found herself becoming a part of the neighborhood in a new way, less as a self-appointed gatekeeper and more as a member of a diverse and evolving community. As the months passed, the Carters became a beloved family in Evergreen Park. Their warmth, generosity, and genuine commitment to the community won over even the most skeptical neighbors. The children were soon a familiar and welcome presence, and the sound of their laughter was no longer seen as an annoyance but as a sign of life and vitality. One day, as Andrew was walking Max down the street, Veronica called out to him from her porch. Mr. Carter, she waved him over, her expression much softer than before. I wanted to apologize again for my behavior when you first moved in. I realize now how wrong I was. Andrew smiled and nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Hathaway. I appreciate that. It takes a lot of courage to admit when we're wrong. Veronica smiled back, genuinely this time. I'm glad you didn't let an old woman's stubbornness drive you away. You and your family have done so much good here. I'm proud to call you my neighbors. The Carters' presence in Evergreen Park continued to transform the neighborhood. They had turned a situation filled with potential conflict into an opportunity for growth, understanding, and unity. They had shown that even the most resistant hearts could change with patience, kindness, and determination. And as for Veronica, she became known not just as the wealthy woman who tried to drive a family away, but as someone who had learned to open her heart in and embrace the spirit of the community. She found herself joining in more and more activities, and over time, she even began to enjoy the sounds of children playing, seeing them not as a disruption, but as a sign that Evergreen Park was a vibrant and welcoming place for all.